Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you Ark's top 10 most underrated tames. In at number 10 is the Angler. Now this thing was released way back, and I do definitely fondly remember this thing from Squid's old Ark series, and his last episode on the Bongoman's Island map was taming the Anglerfish, and still to this day this is actually a pretty useful creature for some certain specific Ark tasks, especially with their silica pearl gathering abilities, and that is pretty much all they have going for them. But silica pearls, if you didn't know already, are an extremely useful Ark resource, so that is why they are an extremely useful Ark creature which many people don't talk or even tame at all, and they just don't question it as a creature. They'll always go for something else. And yes, there are better sea creatures out there, but the Angler is great earlier on to mid-game stages in Ark, where you can't fully shell out for the most powerful ocean tames, but you still want to farm all of those silica pearls to get your fabrication up to the max. These creatures are really worth the tame at some point, as they aren't difficult at all, and they are extremely useful for gathering up all of those silica pearls. In at number 9 is the Chalicotherium. Now you may think this creature is just utterly useless, or you may think this creature is an absolutely insane tame and 100% worth it. And I'm kind of leaning more onto that side, as this creature does have a lot of abilities which many other creatures don't have. And also, the Chalicotherium has an absolutely insane knockback attack, and it is just a generally good creature for just dealing a lot of damage. It's a bit like a slightly worse Megatherium, which really does pack a punch, and it actually is a very decent travel mount as well. It has a very respectable speed stat, one of what you will not complain with at all, and it does have a wealth of other abilities as well, like it being able to throw literal rocks of, I think, even feces at the enemy player. But this ability will take some time to actually practice and get right, as it is a somewhat difficult ability to control, but when done right, it is a really fun, cool ability which does have many uses as well, as it essentially makes this thing a long-range fighting dinosaur, which many other Ark creatures simply do not have. The only one I can really think of off of hand is the Velonasaur's turret ability. In at number 8 is the Carbonemys. Now I know this will be a somewhat unpopular opinion among many of you, but in my opinion, my personal opinion, I really do enjoy the Carbonemys in the early stages of my Ark playing. In those early stages, it is extremely useful to get yourself a creature that can grind all of that oil and those silica pearls and all of those underwater resources. Yes, I will definitely agree this isn't the best creature out there to gather all of those berries and just harvest general things, as I'm pretty sure this thing can't even gather berries, but if it can, it is still an extremely slow Ark creature, which isn't great on land at all. But when it comes into the water, the Carbonemys does actually have some reasonable speed. And yes, just for reference, this B-roll does have some boosted speed on the Carbonemys, as I think it just looks really funny, and it definitely is really funny in my opinion. Comment down below if you think a really fast Carbonemys waggling its little legs really quickly is funny. You know, some people do, and I'm definitely one of those people. But yes, as you can see here in the B-roll, this is me going to gather some oil from the kind of depths of the ocean. Not obviously right to the bottom, as that wouldn't be great, as your player would simply run out of oxygen. As the time when you're getting the Carbonemys, you will not have the scuba tank. I'm pretty confident you won't. So yeah, you can always go into those lakes and lower lying rivers, and there you'll find some oil and definitely some silica pearls, and that is where I think the Carbonemys really shines the most. In at number 7 is the Beelzebufo. Now I know loads of people on my channel really do not feel as if the Beelzebufo is underrated, and they extremely love this creature, and they think it is one of the most popular Ark creatures. And among quite a lot of Ark players, the Beelzebufo is definitely very popular for its cementing paste gathering abilities. But the fact is, a lot of Ark players as well simply discount the Beelzebufo, and I was one of them before I tried it, as they will just simply say beaver dams are the most efficient way to gather cementing cementing paste, and there isn't a point of spending all of that time to get yourself one of these absolutely amazing, charming Ark frogs, which now obviously I have turned my opinion over is simply not the case. In insect caves like the one on the island, the Beelzebufo really does shine, and you can gather thousands and thousands of cementing paste. And with Ark being a buggy game as well, sometimes beaver dams don't even spawn and can be an absolute nuisance to find, so knowing that you can literally just find some insects on a Beelzebufo to get that cementing paste is actually extremely useful as well, where you just can't find beaver dams and you just can't find that cementing paste. The Beelzebufo is definitely the best creature out there for reliable, quick cementing paste gathering. In at number 6 is the Castoroides. Now again, you may be kind of on the edge like the Beelzebufo with this creature, as you may either love it or hate it. These creatures do seem to be quite Marmite creatures, as you may just not see the use in taming a Castoroides. But before you have the chainsaw in Ark, the Castoroides is one of the best creatures for gathering wood. And you all know wood is a resource which you will need a lot of throughout the game, right from the beginning all the way to the end stages of the Ark game. You will need all of that wood. The amount of wood that you will need in one Ark map playthrough is absolutely insane, and the beaver will really help you to actually get you there. And also the beaver is an extremely fast creature as well, and great in the water too, so it is a sort of upgrade to the Carbonemys if you still can't get a creature that is underwater capable that actually spawns in the water, like the Megalodon or Ichthyosaurus or Plesiosaurus or Mosasaurus, which you may not have at the stage when you'll be taming these things. And also on top of that, they have an extra little special spicy ability as well, which makes them really nice to use. The fact is, their saddle is just a really nice portable smithy, extremely useful. In at number 5 is the Spinosaurus, and what a creature this is, and also in my opinion, what an underrated carnivore, as the Rex always seems to take the spotlight away from the Spinosaurus. And in my opinion, the Spinosaurus is pretty much what a Rex is, and in some cases it can be easier to tame, as it does spawn in less hostile environments, and it definitely has a lot of really great uses that the Rex simply can't partake in. Firstly, it has a really amazing turning circle, which the Rex simply can't compete with, as it can turn 360 on the spot, whereas the Rex's turning circle is absolutely atrocious, and in many situations it is so bad you can even get your Rex killed because it can't turn around and attack the creature that is attacking by its feet. Also, the Spinosaurus is great in the water too, and I'm pretty sure it does have an oxygen stat, even though it may not as well. I'm kind of a bit in between. It may have had one in the past and now it doesn't. Either way, its oxygen stat is really great, and it is a great underwater creature with creatures like the Baryonyx, the Mosasaurus, the Plesiosaurus, the Basilosaurus. The list literally goes on for underwater creatures, and unlike most underwater creatures and pretty much every creature apart from this and the Shadowmane, it has the hydration buff, so it will do even more damage when in water, which is just simply great, as with any carnivore you always like to have a buff. Sadly, it does not have the bleed ability, but still, that hydration buff is absolutely OP, and when it goes back onto its hind legs, this thing will do even more damage on top of that. It is definitely a great boss creature, and actually overall, I'm pretty sure it does more damage than the Rex, as it can attack faster, and I think its damage stat is higher. Its only real downside is its health is slightly worse than something like a Rex. In at number 4 is the Baryonyx. Now, this creature is definitely one of my favorites, and one creature that I will never forget in my Ark journey, and I'm surprised that so many other people don't talk about this to the extent that I do. And yes, it is not the most underrated creature out there, but I definitely think every single Ark player should have a Baryonyx in their roster of creatures, and they should know how to tame one effectively, efficiently, and know how to use one effectively as well. Yes, Shadowmanes are really great for caves now, but still the Baryonyx is my go-to 100%, as obviously its size means that this thing can fit into pretty much any cave. and compared to the Shadowmane, I'm just more used to using the Baryonyx, and yes, it may not be quite as versatile in terms of travel. In my opinion, this thing is still extremely useful and deserves a use, even though in some cases it is somewhat overtaken by the Shadowmane. Except the Shadowmane doesn't have the secret little ability that the Baryonyx has hidden up its sleeve. When it's in the water, it can literally stun creatures if you press C. And yes, the Shadowmane may have the hydration buff and things like that. The Shadowmane is a really great creature, don't get me wrong. It's just for things like caving and underwater exploration, I will always go Baryonyx before Shadowmane. And I would urge you to do that too. And also, they are a lot more accessible than the Shadowmane, as they do spawn on the island. Yes, I know the Shadowmane can be found on Fjorda, at least I'm pretty sure it can be found on Fjorda. So it is free to every Ark player out there, apart from Switch, I think doesn't have Fjorda yet, and obviously mobile doesn't. But on spawning on the island, it really does mean that this creature is the most accessible that it can be. Definitely worth the tame. In at number 3 is the Allosaurus. Yet again, another carnivore, which some people again may say they use all the time. But I really think the Allosaurus does not get the press that it really deserves, like the Spinosaurus and the Bary, as the Allo is by far one of the best boss creatures in Ark in general. And yes, the Rex may have more health, but the Allosaurus does an extremely immense amount of damage in packs, and it is just by far one of the most useful combat creatures in Ark. And with its pack buff, which obviously it will get from being in a pack, it can be buffed even more than a Rex can. And if you combine that with UT buffs on top of that, and the Daedon healing everything, you can have yourself a really great boss environment with Allos. And if you do breeding and mutations, you can have yourself an absolutely insane pack of Allos. And they don't tend to be as absolutely mind-bogglingly stupid as a Rex. These things will pretty much never get stuck on anything in the Ark terrain. And also, if you're doing the Overseer on the island, I would probably recommend bringing Allos, as getting through the tech cave with Rexes, just those Rexes, man, they will just get stuck in the lava and they will just die, and they'll just fall in the most stupid places, and it is really infuriating trying to retrieve them. So I will always use something like the Allo or the Spino if I'm feeling like it for the Overseer boss on the island. And I've only used Rexes once, and I completely regret it, as pretty much all of my army was killed in the tech cave, as all of the Rexes just decided, I don't want to live anymore, and I'm just going to jump straight into that lava. But obviously the Allo does not have any of those issues, and unlike the Rex, it has the all famous bleed ability. Definitely a carnivore to be proud and worth taming. In at number 2 is the Mantis. Now again, this is one of Ark's most accessible creatures, with this thing spawning on maps like Ragnarok. And yes, albeit it may not have the easiest taming method out there, requiring you to passive feed it woolly rhino horns on Ragnarok, or you can use Deathworm horns as well, and you will have to use Deathworm horns on the original map that it came on, which is Scorched Earth. And I get that many people do recognize the Mantis out there, but like the others, I really think everyone should have a Mantis in their roster, as some people may think it's just weak, useless, not worth it. Why even bother with all the prep and all of that just effort to get yourself some really good Mantises? And to that, I would say they are extremely great harvesters, and on a map like Ragnarok, these are by far the go-to creature for gathering all of that mutton up. And they're definitely really fun harvesters to use as well. And pretty much any melee weapon that you can think of, apart from tech melee weapons, I'm pretty sure, these things will be able to wield and use to such a high level of ability. The only real downside to using a Mantis with your tools is the durability factor to it. But if you have Ascendant tools, then you'll have a really great time, as those weapons are not going to break as often. The Mantis is definitely a tame every Ark player should have in their roster, and one every Ark player should tame, and in my opinion, it doesn't get the support that it actually really needs. And finally, in at number 1 is the Carnotaurus. Now, many people wouldn't have expected this thing to be in the number 1 slot, but in my opinion, the Carno is my favourite carnivore in Ark. Yes, I prefer it even above the Baryonyx. The amount of nostalgia I have with this creature and the amount of success I've had with this creature is absolutely insane. And when I did Genesis 1 for the first time, I beat the Master Controller, albeit on Gamma, with the Carnotauruses, and it went extremely well, and it was an extremely fun and useful boss fight for me to have. The Carnotauruses are actually a very viable boss creature, albeit they won't do what a Rex, a Spino, or an Allo can. They are still a really good middleman for doing those Gamma boss fights, and you can definitely push for Beta and Alpha depending on what the fight is, just maybe not with the Master Controller. And did you also know that Carnotaurus, translated from Latin into English, means meatball, which is why I always call my Carnotauruses meatball, partly because it sounds funny, but also it is just accurate to what Carnotaurus actually means. Also, since the Carnotaurus' release, this thing has been TLC'd, now having a second attack where it will headbutt the enemy creature and deal that all-famous bleed ability, which only one other creature on this list so far, being the Allosaurus, actually has. And again, this is something that something like the Spino or the Rex doesn't have, which is why it is extremely useful to have yourself a Carnotaurus, and as always, call this thing Carny Dave. The top 10 most underrated Arc Dinos, Part 2. In at number 10 is the Chalicotherium, and I think, in my opinion, this creature is severely underrated for so many things, as this actually is a pretty decent combat creature, and albeit its tame is very weird, requiring a lot of beer, which is something no other tame uses, and it can be a bit of a pain to get. It is actually a really good combat creature when you actually have one to use, and it is great, and especially on smaller creatures, it has insane knockback, and it can even throw boulders as well, and that is a simply great ability which can't be missed. So you really should give the Chalicotherium a try at some point, and you will definitely not regret the tame. Next up, we have the Bloodstalker, and you may say that this is a controversial one, as it is used a lot in some cases, but I would actually say that this creature isn't used enough, and everyone should be using a Bloodstalker if they can obviously get their hands on one. These things are just so useful, and they're so quick, and they're really great in the water as well. And I don't see too many people using these things for water cave runs on the island, which I have been doing in recent times. Obviously, it makes sense that you wouldn't be doing that in ASA, as the Bloodstalker isn't in ASA at the moment, but in ASC there really isn't any excuse, because I think these things do spawn on Fjorda. If not, then I'll take that back, but I'm pretty sure that they do spawn on Fjorda, which means that there is a free DLC out there with Bloodstalkers. Either way, you can use a spawn command as well, and then tame one from wild if you want to do that to get access to that creature. And I really think you should really try and get your hands on one of these things, as they are some of the most useful creatures out there. They can travel around the map really fast, like I've said. They deal a lot of damage, and on Gen 1 and on Gen 2, they're pretty useful for loads of missions as well, and they are really splendid water creatures. So what isn't to love about the Bloodstalker? Maybe apart from its taming method. Now, the Carno has to be respected when it comes to Arc, at least in my opinion, because this is one of the most useful creatures out there to me, especially in the earlier stages of the game. This creature just has so much to like about it, from its bleed ability to its speed and its ridiculously easy tame, especially on ASA. If you're an Allo lover though, then you can always go for the Allo over the Carno, but there is a certain charm in the Carno which I don't get from the Allo, and I'll usually not even tame Carnos and go for an Allo. But the Allo is obviously the significantly more popular tame, and I would kind of lean that more towards the overrated side of Arc creatures, but I would say it's not particularly overrated or underrated, and it kind of is where it should be. Whereas the Carno is really just not respected enough in my opinion,
and I wish people used it more, especially considering when Squid used it back in the day, that was like basically the best creature to him. Obviously, Rexus was sort of kind of more respected, but that was also like 2016 arc, and back then Rexes were just like the most highly respected creatures, where now Rexes really aren't that much of a big deal anymore. Now, the Gacha has not really been talked about ever since Extinction came out. Obviously, this is still a very useful creature, which a lot of people out there, I'm sure, do use, but I do think it deserves a lot more press. But I guess it kind of does get a little bit of press, considering Gacha Claws comes around every Christmas. But still, the actual Gacha really isn't used as much, although it is somewhat of an icon. People really don't use it all that much, and its abilities are really ones to be respected. Now, the element dust thing is a little bit out of date, considering that element is so easy to get on Gen 2, but all of those weapons which you can get from this thing is not accessible from any other source, really. Obviously, drops are a thing, and this is going to become even less useful when Extinction's out on ASA, because drops are OP, but I really think this creature should be respected and used more to this day. Now, next up, we have the Megalosaurus. And this creature really is one of those creatures which I have to put on this list. And albeit when Arboration came out, this thing was used so much. And if you are playing Arboration, you're probably going to use this thing. But nowadays, this thing kind of seems somewhat forgotten about. And it is literally one of the best carnivores in the game, especially considering its size. And it is so iconic, and it has a wealth of abilities to go on top of that as well. And albeit the mechanic of it only really working at nighttime isn't one which is the best compared to some other carnivores, but it is really great on Arboration, considering that it counts as always being night, which is obviously why these things are very useful. Also, there you can see one of the abilities that this creature has, which is when it can grapple creatures into its mouth. Obviously, it can't really do that with really large creatures. It'd be very weird if it could do that with something like a Rex. But smaller creatures, it can do that, and that is a very efficient way to get rid of Microraptors. And what absolute nuisances those creatures are. So it is really great that you can get rid of those things with this thing. And also on top of that, in terms of its size, it is a really good size for transport, making it a pretty good travel dino as well. And as my go-to on Arboration, if I'm getting a Rock Drake for the first time, I'll just bring one of these things down, obviously a good level, so it can withstand all the things down there, and then I will get my first Rock Drake egg, and then from there I will use a Rock Drake to get down there. But still, the Megalosaurus is a very good travel mount and a very good carnivore overall, and I think the general public should use it more. In at number 5 is the Spino, and this creature, in my opinion, really isn't respected as enough as it should be. In terms of its popularity, yes, it isn't going to be the most underrated creature out there, but that is why it is in number 5. But in terms of its use compared to its popularity, it is very outweighed compared to something like the Rex, which albeit doesn't get as much press as it used to back in the early days of Arc, and that is because the Rex just simply isn't the strongest dinosaur in the game now. And I think at a point when the game released it was, then the Alpha Rex came around, and then Gigas came around, and then yeah, the Rex really wasn't respected as much. But the Spino back in the early days was respected a lot actually, as this was just considered the stronger carnivore by so many people out there, and loads of you probably used this thing back in the day, and I used it then. And obviously it still does have enough popularity to warrant a TLC, as Wildcard did give it one of those, so now it can stand on its hind legs, it has the hydration buff, and it's just overall a better creature. But in terms of it compared to the Rex, I actually vastly prefer it because of its increased mobility, the fact that it is great in the water as well, and the fact that it deals a little bit more damage than the Rex, although its health is significantly lower, which is where its main drawback is. But if you do some good breeding on these things, and you get loads and loads of health mutations, you can have yourself a Rex equivalently health Spino, and then you'll have yourself a really really great boss creature. And it's actually a shame that these creatures aren't used as much as they should be, in my opinion, especially considering they got that TLC. Next up, we have the Mantis, and this creature is really, again, not used as much as it should be, and it has a really cool ability. And I know quite a lot of you PvE players out there do use the Mantis, but to PvP players and also just the general Ark community, I would advise you tame a Mantis at some point. They are just so good, and there really isn't an excuse to not tame one unless you're on mobile, obviously, as these things spawn on Ragnarok. And they are ridiculously easy to tame once you've already done the prep. You've got the ghillie, you've got the bug repellent, and you've got the woolly rhino horns. It's just a very simple passive tame, and you have yourself pretty much one of the best harvesters in the Ark game. And I especially use it for harvesting mutton with swords, obviously, as it is just a really great way of doing it. But it is also great at gathering metal with picks, obviously. You can gather great stone with hatchets. You can use pikes as well, which I will use for the manticore on Scorched Earth. If I'm ever doing it, I won't use swords, I'll use pikes as the durability is better. And they can pretty much wield any melee weapon which you choose them to, making them an absolute harvesting god. They can't wield tech weapons though, that would be a little bit too OP. In at number 3 is the Crystal Wyvern, and this creature, in my opinion, is one of those which is severely underrated, as it is pretty much the easiest tame in the Ark game. The only real downside it has is obviously that level 65 requirement, which is a bit of a shame really, but apart from that, this is a literal perfect creature to me. It is the same as a wyvern in reality, and it has a much easier taming method, just requiring some crystal. You don't need anything else. You can just go on a note run and then get the necessary crystal, and in your first even hour of playing, you can probably have one of these wyverns at your disposal. On single player, obviously. On official, I think that is a bit too optimistic. But even on official, these things can be obtained pretty quickly with a good note run. And also, if you get the blood crystal wyverns as well, you have yourself an even better version of the crystal wyvern. That creature is definitely by far the best version of the crystal wyvern, and considering their mobility and power, which is I'm pretty sure the same as an exact wyvern, at least it feels like it to me when using one, you really can't go wrong with these things, especially considering they don't need a saddle. And earlier than the Pteranodon, as long as you do a note run, you can get these things really quickly into your roster of creatures. So what isn't to love about this thing? In at number 2 is the Beelzebufo, and this creature is the absolute king when it comes to cementing paste gathering, obviously doing that through killing any kind of insect, and especially considering ASA only has the island at the moment and insect levels aren't a thing on ASA, this is the best time, if you have ASA obviously, to get a Beelzebufo, and it still is a great idea on any other Ark map where these things spawn and there are insects, which I think is every Ark map that has the Beelzebufo. Not sure if the Beels is on every map though, as I don't think it would be fitting on maps like Scorched Earth, but you never really know, as I think the Megatheriums are on Scorched Earth or something. There's some, no, it's the direwolves, isn't it? Yeah, direwolves are on Scorched Earth, which is a little bit weird, so you don't really know what to expect, but I'm pretty sure this thing isn't on Scorched, and I don't think it's on Arboration either. But either way, on the island, which is the map which kind of matters the most, as most people have it, it is obviously there, and you have the insect cave in the redwoods, so this is pretty much the most sustainable way of getting cementing paste. Yes, a beaver dam may be easier, but this is going to give you even more cementing paste, and you can always rely that you'll get the same amount every time, and there won't be the risk of beaver dams not spawning. And in at number 1 is the Velonasaur, and I really think this creature should be respected a lot more when it comes to Ark, especially considering I am playing through Extinction again at the moment, and I have just fell in love with this creature. There is just so much good about it. It is so cool, and its abilities are actually very useful. For starters, it is actually a very good travel mount, having a lot of speed and barely any stamina drain, which is perfect for a travel mount. Also, its saddle really isn't very expensive as well, and its taming method is very easy. You just build a simple 2x2 trap and then net gun it if you want to. Instead of building a trap, you don't need to net gun it in the trap, that's unnecessary. You can either put it in a basic trap or net gun it, and then simply trank it out, and then you have yourself a great Velonasaur. Sadly, the turrets which they fire, or the bullets, not the turrets, they do not scale when you level up the melee damage, but you can always level up your stamina to shoot even more of these things. And I think when you look at it head on, that animation kind of looks a little bit creepy. Obviously, you don't just have the turret firing ability, although that is the most useful to me. You also just do have your general melee abilities, and it can also shake the spines off of its back too, which you're seeing here. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you all enjoyed this one. And as always, comment down below what art creature you think is the most underrated, and I'll see you all later.